Hey, good morning and welcome to yet another Take30 from the BI practice at Ironside. Thank you all for joining. So today's topic is enterprise reporting, assessment, simplification, and migration. And for the agenda today, we're going to do introductions, talk about why organizations migrate, talk about an approach to migration, some considerations, and then open it up for Q&A. All right, in terms of introductions, myself, I'm Scott Masage. I'm the practice director for BI at Ironside. I've been with Ironside about 8.5 years, but I've been in the BI space for about 21 years. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Chris Eller. I'm the AWS practice lead at Ironside. Inevitably, when we're talking about migrations in 2021, the topic of cloud comes up. So we have some interesting things to share and talk about. And thank you for joining.
All right, thanks, Chris. Just a quick point out to our upcoming session. So next week we'll be offering a Take30 based on our focus on getting started with artificial intelligence or AI. So no doubt this is an exciting topic, very prevalent in the marketplace these days, and certainly there's a high level of interest. So that should be, again, an exciting session. Okay, so let's start here. So talk a bit about why organizations migrate their BI tools from one platform to another. So it's often the case that there are feature gaps between what your users want to be doing and what your legacy tooling can do. You know, some of these feature gaps are real, and actually some of them are perceived. But either way, they're important, right? And they matter to your user community. There are times when, or there are instances where the tool is perceived as being, the existing tool is perceived as being too difficult for users to learn, and thus they're leveraging different methods, you know, unbeknownst perhaps to you as an owner of a BI tool. Also, it's become clear that buying power has shifted from IT to the business functions. So sometimes different business functions just buy what they want to use. You know, over time, those solutions gain traction, and then it becomes untenable for organizations to have every color of the BI rainbow at their disposal, right? It's a very costly thing. Speaking of costs, licensing and support costs are often a factor with the kind of incumbent legacy tool. With traditional BI solutions, there are incremental increases in subscription and support costs, along with the perception of little or no incremental value that you get, even though you're paying year after year. In addition, there are new cloud-based and cloud-native options that tend to be subscription-based, and in some cases, these are even impression-based. And perhaps these modes of licensing are better aligned with how your organization leverages BI. Since the introduction of cloud BI, it's largely been about, you know, the focus of those cloud BI tools has largely been visualizations and mode 2 analytics. But we've been in conversations with many of the leading vendors, and we can tell you that enterprise BI capabilities are coming to these tools. Next is infrastructure costs and challenges. You know, typically sizing an on-prem infrastructure for BI is a compromise. You can't easily scale as demand dictates, so you wind up either underserving or overbuilding and dealing with the related costs of that. This situation is somewhat improved by cloud-based solutions. However, you typically, even with those solutions, you typically need to estimate demand to size things the right way from the start. Now, if we talk about cloud-native tools, so those with serverless architectures, this actually isn't a concern anymore because the scaling just happens automatically. And then what you're focused on is paying for the subscription-based licensing. And finally, organizational strategy can be a reason to migrate, right? Sometimes new leadership just demands new tools. In some organizations, there's a mandate for distributed versus centralized analytics, and that drives the desire for different tools. All right. So wanted to cover an approach to migration. So this is an approach to BI migrations that we often leverage. As you can see, it's a 4-phase model, and we'll get into each of these in more detail on the following slides. So the first phase is assess. The second phase is simplify and align. And then phase 3 is scale, and as a companion to scale, we have the enable phase, and all of these are critically important. So first, we'll talk about the assess phase. So the assess phase is focused on discovery and analysis. And when you think about it, it's likely that a lot has changed since your organization stood up your existing BI environment, right? So new analytic needs have developed. New users are now part of the community. You're likely connecting to new data sources, and in general, technology has advanced substantially. Given all of this, it's critical to first assess what you have today before starting the journey to migrate to a new platform. So, first you need to consider the technology landscape in your organization. What's new, what has changed, what is still the same? Will the new solution work with the existing landscape, both new and old? What integrations exist that need consideration? And when we talk about integrations, these might be technical integrations like reports or dashboards that are integrated with Salesforce, so that when your sellers go in, they see content that's actually driven by the BI tool. But also think about integration from the perspective of integration into business process. If you think about it, some of the legacy solutions are highly sophisticated, and you might find whole cottage industries that are developed based on a few key reports, right? Business process, people getting things done, leveraging certain reports that you don't even know about, right? In terms of the user community, are there new analytic personas that need to be considered? Right, so perhaps when you stood up your environment, you didn't have data scientists, and now you do, right? So how to handle that, and what are the licensing implications of these new personas, and what are the capabilities that they're going to rely on? Next, it's very important to understand your content. So, what is the usage of your content? What is the complexity of that content, and how compatible is it with the future tool that you've aligned to? Are there feature and functionality gaps that exist?
And also, Scott, just in mapping kind of the terminology, right? A lot has changed for a lot of customers since they initially deployed these tools, and then the complementary solutions that support them around, even things like change management, different ways that things are secured, have different ways that things are stored, right? So there's a lot for customers to think about, particularly if they start to incorporate am I going to migrate to a cloud platform along with my BI, right? So there's a lot of work that we've done to start to frame the conversation and make sure people are comfortable with all aspects of a migration, and sometimes it's we get spun around on terminology and how things are maybe called differently in this new world. True.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next we have the simplify and align phase. The goal here is to, having understood the magnitude of the challenge in the assess phase, simplify and come up with a plan and get everyone on the same page so we can move forward. So it's important to take a look at the content you have and determine how much of it is useful. In many cases, your organization has been developing content for 5, 10, 15 years. And while everyone understands that governing your content is generally a good thing, it often winds up low on the priority list, right? There's always a new report to build, and the idea of going in and cleaning out the stuff that doesn't get used anymore, again, falls down the list. And really engaging in that cleanup involves a bit of risk, right? If you don't want to pull something away that someone is using, and how do you determine that? So certainly at Ironside, we develop approaches and tools to help you with this simplify step, help you understand what's out there, its complexity and its compatibility. Moving on, how will you address feature and potentially expectation gaps that are uncovered in the assess stage. Right? How will you approach the migration? Certainly there's the big bang approach, but there's also an incremental approach. There's a lift and shift method, and there's also kind of a more thoughtful reimagining of how you might use the new tool. We often recommend the incremental approach, as doing everything at once is a bit overwhelming and presents a significant risk to business continuity. One issue with the incremental approach is that of prolonging the overall migration and the reality of having to manage costs for 2 or more platforms at once. Certainly, we've run into this with clients and have worked with them to help manage those costs. In terms of the lift and shift versus reimagining method, lift and shift is often the more expedient approach. However, you often risk not realizing the ROI of the new functionality. Feature gaps can also impact this as well, right? You might set out to do lift and shift and hit a wall and understand that something you want to be able to move over, you can't because that functionality just doesn't exist in the new tool or doesn't exist yet. Next, it's important to demonstrate value, right? So as you align, right, it's important to look for partners in the organization to help you evangelize this change, right? And plan to deliver things like proof of technologies, proofs of concept, MVPs that demonstrate the value of the new tool. And then finally, it's important to make sure that you have a sponsor in leadership, right? This does a number of things. One of them is to signal to the user community the gravity of the endeavor, and it can also help you be successful. Okay, the next phase is scale. So scaling is about the actual migration itself and scaling it up over time. Again, this is more of an incremental approach. Resourcing is critically important during this phase, as your current staff, they already have a day job, right? They're already burdened with supporting the legacy environment. Perhaps this is an opportunity for a bit of self-service in terms of helping push the migration along. Often organizations will look outside to third parties to help manage and drive this effort. And certainly Ironside has been engaged many times in the past to make this happen. Architecture and engineering is also critical as you go. These activities involve making the right connections between technologies, designing the right security constructs, which likely involve new approaches in the new tool, and many, many more, right? How can you improve and accelerate the journey? Well, the reality is that there are likely going to be bumps in the road. So, how can you improve and accelerate? Again, sponsorship is important here in this endeavor, and can help you avoid the big potholes in the road, if you will. Communication is critical here as well. Transparency and frequent communication with the user community is to your advantage, right? No one wants to be left in the dark in a process like this, right? The last thing is, if you can leverage accelerators, that's of great benefit. At Ironside, we frequently help clients through migrations throughout our history, and based on that experience, we've developed tooling and methods to help accelerate this process.
I mean, just one thing to that point, some of the cloud vendors, it is true, a lot of the cloud vendors, they've been very developer focused. And so some of the emerging cloud technologies, even in BI, are more API based and give opportunities for a level of programmatic migration, right? So this may have at a point in time been 100% pure kind of level of re-implementation, but one of the exciting things with the cloud vendors is how they're making a lot more programmatic access to support migrations like we're presenting.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And then we've got, of course, the enable phase, right? So the enable phase should be run concurrently with the scale phase. And it's really about driving user adoption, because user adoption is the thing that's going to give you the return on your investment. It's also the thing that's going to make you successful. So, really, if users don't understand the new tool and don't use it effectively, they're going to go back to old methods, or they might find their own new methods, right? And again, as budget, kind of the center of gravity around budgets has switched from IT to business teams. They have that freedom, so it's important to understand that. So really, it's critical to support them in their enablement through this transition. Okay, and again, as stated before, transparency and communication are important to the process, and by communicating, early and often, this helps tamp down the organizational anxiety and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's inevitably going to spring up here. Another critical part of this phase is to, again, plan on demonstrating the value of the platform, again, early and often, so that people understand, if the user community as a whole understands that different parts of the business are being successful with the new tool, that is going to, there's a certain amount of organizational peer pressure that can be driven out of that, and that can help accelerate your migration. So bottom line, enablement and user adoption really are things you need to support, invest, and drive to help you successfully complete this journey. All right. In terms of considerations, things to think about, in our experience with migrations of all kinds, we've got some key takeaways and some key pitfalls and lessons learned, right? Things to avoid. The first is migrating content that is no longer useful to the organization, right? In a lot of cases, many organizations we work with actually don't know. They know that they have thousands of reports, but they actually don't know how many they have and don't know how they're being used. They also, they might have a lot of duplication in terms of their content. Many of them have seen examples, but they don't know the extent of it. So it's, again, it's critically important to understand usage and make some decisions about what to keep, what has value, what does not, right? Our typical approach here is to say, look, if there's a report or a dashboard that hasn't been used 10 times in the last 13 months, then it's of very little value, okay? Second would be not optimizing for the 2B platform. And specifically the architecture and performance, right? So, again, if you're migrating to a cloud-based architecture, how can you derive advantages out of that, right? Also performance, again, in a serverless, with a serverless BI solution, scaling is built in. But if you're going with something that's not serverless or sticking with an on-prem solution, consider how things have changed in your organization and tune appropriately, right? Tune and size appropriately. Okay, also not optimizing for BI capabilities and features, right? New functionality, if you think about the major vendors, new functionality is coming out minimally quarterly and sometimes monthly, right? So, how do you keep pace with what those new features are, what those new capabilities are, and how do you adapt to them, and how do you communicate their availability to your user community, and communicate that and embrace them, right? Showcase this, help them understand that there's a capability that can solve for their business use cases, right? That's critically important to migrations. a couple more, not addressing new use cases, new personas, and new demands, right? Change is permanent, right? So it's important to understand where things are, what people need, have regular touch points with the user community to understand where they want to go and what they need to be doing. And then finally, not focusing on enablement for increased adoption, user value, and return on investment, right? And so if you think about it, right, when whatever tool you have was rolled out, there was likely a groundswell around enablement, right? Get people enabled, lots of focus on that, but that kind of tapers off over time. And you may find that, new folks coming on, it may be the case that in the last while, enablement has been a bit at a low, right? Like where new people coming on, maybe it's assumed they know the tool, right? Or it's a struggle for them to get enabled on the tool. So it's like, okay, if we're migrating to a new tool, definitely reinvest in that, because again, enablement is going to drive the adoption and the value, and then ultimately the return on the investment.
Well, I guess just to share, and probably some news coming on this, these whole migrations, and particularly when they come to cloud and some of these emerging platforms under the Ironside umbrella, we're kind of referring to this as Cloud Path, and the community of Ironside 30 or Take30 should be waiting to see some exciting announcements for some of the supported platforms in the coming weeks. So.
Okay, all right. So with that, we'll wrap up. So again, thank you all for joining yet another Take30. And next week, again, we're going to the focus is going to be AI and how to get started there. So look forward to you joining that session. And thank you, Chris, for helping out today.
Scott?
And yes.
This is Debbie. I just wanted to quick add that we've been doing the registrations for the Take30s on a monthly basis. So this February registration, we are about to put up the March agenda, and that will be a new registration link. So please check back and register for the March Take30s, but they will be at the same time, Take30 Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie. All right. Thank you again for joining, and have a great day.